Our Sun is a giant ball of energy and the center to all life on planet Earth. It supplies all of the energy that drives Earth's ecosystems and cycles and makes all life on our planet possible. Solar energy arrives as light and particles of energy known as photons. It takes about 8 minutes for a photon to travel the 93 million miles across space from our Sun to the Earth. Photons travel at 186,000 miles per second. Only a tiny amount of the solar energy emitted from our Sun ever reaches the Earth. Different places on Earth receive more or less solar energy, depending on the location and the season. When these photons reaches the atmosphere, land, and water, some are transformed into another form of energy, heat. Heat that warms the Earth, warms the atmosphere, drives the water cycle, and causes the occurrence of air and water. Light that comes from the Sun can be changed into heat, kinetic energy, or potential energy. Kinetic energy is energy in motion that performs work at the expense of potential energy. Potential energy is stored energy and is available for performing work. Whenever energy is converted from one form into another, some of it is given off as heat, which is the most random form of energy. The transfer of energy in the ecosystem is governed by the laws of thermodynamics. The first law is the conservation of matter and energy, which states that matter and energy can neither be created nor destroyed, and that the energy which is converted from one form into another must always remain constant. The best example is when wood burns. The potential energy lost from the molecular bonds of the wood is equal to the kinetic energy released as heat. When a chemical reaction results in the loss of energy from the system, the reaction is exothermic. On the other hand, endothermic reaction is a process that absorbs energy in the form of heat. The best example is photosynthesis in plants, wherein the molecules of the products store more energy than the reactants that combine to form the products. The extra energy is stored in the products, which is acquired from the sunlight harnessed by the chlorophyll of the heat. The second law of thermodynamics states that when energy is transferred or transformed, part of the energy assumes a form that cannot pass on any further. This is also commonly referred to as entropy. This is best portrayed by a burning wood. The burning wood does not increase or decrease much of the potential energy, and degrades into a form incapable of doing further work. This is then transferred to the surrounding environment as heat. The same thing also happens to energy in the ecosystem. As energy is transferred from one organism to another in the form of food, a portion is stored as energy in the living tissue, whereas a large part of the energy is dissipated as heat, thus increasing entropy. Ecosystem is an open system. It supports structure and functioning due to external energy input. Usually, ecosystem consumes solar energy in the form of visible light, though some ecosystems use chemical energy. The flow of energy through a terrestrial ecosystem starts with the harnessing of sunlight by autotrophs through photosynthesis.
The rate at which radiant energy is converted by photosynthesis to organic compounds is referred to as primary productivity, because it is the first and basic form of energy storage. Organisms creating primary production are called producers. Energy that is stored in organic matter is used by producers themselves and is dissipated during the process of plants' respiration, growth, and reproduction in the form of heat. The remaining energy accumulated in plant biomass is used by animals to support their structure and functioning. The total rate of photosynthesis, or energy assimilated by the producers, is called gross primary production, while the rate of energy storage as organic matter after respiration is called the net primary productivity. Net primary productivity can be described by the difference between gross primary production, or GPP, and respiration by producers, or Production is usually expressed in units of energy per unit area per unit time, or simply kilocalories per square meter per year. And also, it may be expressed in units of dry organic matter, gram per meter squared per year. Biomass differs from production, to which biomass is the amount of organic matter present at any given time, but productivity is the rate at which organic matter is created by photosynthesis. Standing crop biomass is the amount of accumulated organic matter found in an area at any given time. It is usually expressed as grams of organic matter per square meter. The simplest and most common method of measuring net primary productivity in terrestrial ecosystems is to estimate the change in standing crop biomass over a time interval. There are two possible losses of biomass over a period of time. First is the loss of biomass due to the death of plants, and second is the loss of biomass due to the consumption of consumer organisms. The estimate of net primary productivity then is SCB plus D plus C. An array of environmental factors, including climate, temperature, and precipitation, influence the productivity of terrestrial ecosystems. The net primary productivity for these ecosystems increases with increasing mean annual temperature and rainfall. The length of the growing season is the period during which the temperatures are warm enough to support photosynthesis. As a result, sites with higher mean annual temperature typically support higher rates of photosynthesis. For photosynthesis and productivity to occur, the plant must open the stomata to take in carbon dioxide. When the stomata is open, water is lost from the leaf to the surrounding air. Water molecules move around through evaporation from plants. It's called transpiration. Think of it as a plant's version of sweating. Water moves through a plant from the root and eventually evaporates from tiny pores in the leaves. In 1 year, a large oak tree can transpire 40,000 gallons. That's equivalent to 151,000 liters of water. Now for the plant to keep the stomata open, roots must replace the lost water. The higher the rainfall, the more water is available for transpiration. The plant's rate of primary productivity now depends on the amount of water available to the plant, since this limits both the rate of photosynthesis and the amount of leaves that can be supported. Temperature influences the photosynthetic rate, and the amount of available water limits photosynthesis and the amount of leaves that can be supported. Warm, wet conditions make the tropical rainforest the most productive terrestrial ecosystem. Nutrient availability also directly influences rates of primary productivity. Light is a primary factor limiting productivity in aquatic ecosystems, and the depth to which light penetrates in a lake or ocean is crucial in determining the zone of primary productivity. Photosynthetically active radiation declines exponentially with water depth. The photosynthetic rate and subsequently the gross productivity of other aquatic organisms are highest at immediate levels of PAR. In contrast, respiration rate does not change much with depth. This means that as the organisms go deeper in the water column, the photosynthetic rate declines as the light intensity decreases, until at some point the rate of photosynthesis is equal to the rate of respiration, and net primary productivity is zero. This zone is referred to as the compensation depth and corresponds to the depth at which the availability of light is equal to the light compensation point. Like in terrestrial ecosystems, nutrient availability is a pervasive influence on the productivity of oceans. The most productive ecosystems are the shallow coastal waters, coral reefs, and estuaries, where nutrients are more available. Nutrient availability also limits the net primary productivity in lake ecosystems. In rivers and streams, net primary productivity is low.
with inputs of dead organic matter from adjacent terrestrial ecosystems being an important energy input. Organic carbon produced within an ecosystem is called autochthonous, while inputs from outside the ecosystem are termed allochthonous. In aquatic ecosystems, the allochthonous output is through the photosynthesis by aquatic plants, attached algae in the shallow waters, and by phytoplankton in the open waters. However, a substantial proportion of organic carbon in these ecosystems is allochthonous, derived from organic matter from adjacent terrestrial ecosystems entering the water as both dissolved. In many aquatic ecosystems, a substantial proportion of organic carbon is derived from dead organic matter from adjacent terrestrial ecosystems. The relative importance of external sources of organic carbon varies widely among different aquatic ecosystems. In large rivers, lakes, and most marine systems, the majority of organic carbon is derived internally from photosynthesis by autotrophs. In contrast, the dominant source of organic carbon is often from external sources of external carbon in streams and lakes. As the stream widens further downstream, the shading by adjacent trees becomes limited to the stream margins, and the increase in available light in the water column allows for an increase in net primary productivity by submerged aquatic plants, algae, and phytoplankton. The result is a range of relative importance of allochthonous and autochthonous sources of carbon in the energy balance of flowing water ecosystems from smaller headwater streams to larger river systems. Every species is important to the health of an ecosystem. Removing one species can weaken a habitat, but if a keystone species is removed, an entire ecosystem could collapse. If large predators such as crocodiles disappeared, there would be a change in balance and function of the ecosystem. Crocodiles are known as a species that clean up the river as they eat carcasses of other species and balance its population in the habitat. This has been seen as a major role to ensure that rivers are functioning smoothly. Plants allocate the carbon fixed in photosynthesis. Plants can also either allocate it to non-photosynthetic tissues, such as stems and roots, or to their photosynthetic tissues, such as their leaves. The latter pathway results to plant growth and greater carbon gain. Looking at these graphs, it is apparent that net primary productivity, or NPP, is dependent on temperature and water availability, expressed here as amount of precipitation. Plants living in wet and warm environments would inevitably allocate net carbon gain to photosynthetic tissues, which is in turn will increase NPP. Biomes with high NPP, such as tropical rainforests, have low root-to-shoot ratios. Arid shrublands and desert ecosystems, on the other hand, have high root-to-shoot ratios. Differences in these ratios reflect the greater allocation of plants to roots relative to above-ground tissues with decreasing annual precipitation. This relationship is true for both terrestrial and marine environments. It appears that there is an exception. Even though tropical coral reefs have high NPP, their standing biomass is almost insignificant. What is this incipient contradiction? The solution to this quandary depends on two things. First, the period over which NPP is measured and phytoplankton turnover. Phytoplanktons are the dominant net primary producers in marine ecosystems, but they are also incredibly short-lived. There is a constant and fast turnover of phytoplankton populations. As a result, There are many generations occurring during one period of NPP measurement. The standing biomass, then, at any time interval, is low as compared to the accumulated NPP. Based on this, relative growth rate, which can be measured using RNPP or biomass gain per unit of plant mass over time, is high for open oceans compared to terrestrial ecosystems. In terrestrial ecosystems, relative growth rate or RNPP decreases as NPP increases. Remember that standing biomass dictates NPP. This reflects a general pattern of high growth rates for grasses when compared to trees. In the same ecosystem, primary production varies with time and age. Photosynthesis and plant growth are affected by seasonal variations. Regions with distinct seasonality, such as temperate and Mediterranean, have a period of dormancy and peaks of productivity. Wet regions of the tropics, where conditions are almost always favorable for plant growth, have almost no variation in primary productivity. Periods of hot and dry weather give rise to low primary productivity of grasses, while higher yielding years were during cool and mesic periods. Other disturbances, such as herbivory and fires, can also lead to variations in NPP. Overgrazing and defoliation by insects significantly reduce NPP. Fires, though it increases NPP during wet years, it also reduces NPP during periods of drought. Stand age of producers also affects NPP. As trees age, they accumulate more woody structures. Ratio of leaves grow older goes into support and maintenance. This is why above-ground NPP decreases after reaching a peak at a certain stand age. Stith and colleagues from Australian National University have shown that as the stage of the forest increases, leaf area and rates of photosynthesis and respirations decline. Secondary production is the net energy of production that is used by various animals dependent on one species to produce new tissues and offsprings. Secondary productivity is greatest when birth rates in populations and growth rate of individuals are highest. It is dependent on primary productivity. Herbivore biomass increases with primary productivity. This relationship between secondary and primary productivity can also be observed in aquatic ecosystems. Phytoplankton productivity is directly proportional to zooplankton productivity. Relationships presented suggest a bottom-up control. This is when producers greatly influence trophic levels above them, including the predators. However, in another model, it suggests that primary productivity is dependent on predation. Predators keep the populations of herbivores in check, which allows plant biomass to accumulate.
Energy fixed by plants is the base that life on Earth depends on. Energy stored by the plants is passed along through the ecosystem in a food chain, a series of eating and being eaten. Feeding relationships within a food chain are defined by consumers or trophic levels. The first trophic level is that of primary consumers, the plants. The second level is that of first-level consumers, the herbivores. The higher levels are that of second-level consumers, the carnivores. Consumers may not only occupy one trophic level. most consumers only occupy one trophic level. However, omnivorous species may occupy 2 or more trophic levels. There are 2 major types of food chains in the ecosystem: the grazing food chain and the detrital food chain. The main distinction between these 2 food chains is the source of energy for the first level consumer. In the grazing food chain, the source of energy is living plant biomass, while in the detrital food chain, the source of energy is detritus, or dead organic matter. Another difference is that in the energy flow between trophic levels. In the grazing food chain, the flow of energy is unidirectional, with net primary productivity production providing energy for the first level consumer, and the first level consumers providing for the second level consumers. However, in the detrital food chain, energy flow is not unidirectional. This is because waste products and detritus are recycled in each trophic level, returning as an input to the detritus matter at the beginning of the food chain. Although there is a trend between availability of primary productivity and secondary productivity, or the productivity of consumer organisms across a variety of ecosystems, there is still a considerable amount of variation in the efficiency of these consumer organisms to transform consumed energy into secondary production. The net primary production is the energy available for grazing herbivores that are in the second trophic level. Some portions of that energy will be ingested by the consumer, and the remainder makes its way to the detrital food chain. Of the energy that is ingested by the consumer, a portion of this is assimilated across the gut wall, and the remainder of which is expelled from the body as waste products. Of the assimilated energy, a portion of which is used in cellular respiration, where energy is lost in the form of heat, and the remainder is used in production, which includes the production of new cells and tissues, as well as reproduction. Assimilation efficiency is the measure of the efficiency with which the consumer extracts energy from the food. This is measured as the ratio of assimilation to ingestion. Production efficiency is the measure of how efficient a consumer is in incorporating assimilated energy into secondary production. This is measured as the ratio of production to assimilation. Consumption efficiency is the ratio of ingestion to production at the next lower trophic level. This defines the amount of energy available for consumption. If applied to each trophic level, it can be seen that first, the production from each trophic level provides the input for the next higher trophic level, and second, unconsumed production and waste products from each trophic level provides input for detritus, or dead organic matter. The consumption efficiency defines the amount of available energy produced by any given trophic level that is consumed by the next higher level. Therefore, the pathway for energy flow through the food chain is determined by the values of consumption efficiency for the different consumer trophic levels. This provides a basis for comparison of energy flow through the various ecosystems.
It is the detrital food chain which is the major one in terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. Ecologists Helen Sayre of the University of Toronto in Canada and Michael Pace of the University of Virginia conducted a study where they found that in most terrestrial and shallow water ecosystems, herbivory only removed a small percentage of primary productivity. However, the grazing food chain may be dominant when it comes to deep water aquatic ecosystems with their low standing biomass, rapid turnover of organisms, and high rate of harvest. Differences also reside in the consumption efficiency and energy flow between forest and grassland ecosystems. A comparison of consumption efficiencies of herbivores and predators in both ecosystems shows that the consumption efficiency of of herbivores inhabiting deciduous ecosystems have a lower value as compared to herbivores inhabiting grassland ecosystems. Predators inhabiting forests, on the other hand, have higher consumption efficiency as compared to predators inhabiting grassland ecosystems. There exists a difference in the energy flow of the various aquatic ecosystems. Energy flow between flowing water ecosystems, such as streams and rivers, differ from both terrestrial and standing water ecosystems. Flowing water ecosystems have an extremely low net primary productivity, wherein the detrital food chain dominates over the grazing food chain. Thus, the four different ecosystems, forest, grassland, standing water, and running water, have different patterns of energy transfer. In forest ecosystems, net primary productivity is removed mostly by dead organic matter, leading to a higher respiration. This goes the same for grassland ecosystems. Phytoplankton communities found in steady water ecosystems, on the other hand, have NPP or net primary productivity largely removed by both grazer and dead organic matter. Stream communities have dead organic matter which comes from terrestrial catchments. Both dead organic matter and the grazer system remove NPP in fairly average amounts. When it comes to energy in each successive trophic level, it is an ecological rule of thumb that only 10% of the energy stored as biomass in a given trophic level is converted to biomass at the next trophic level. This rate of energy transfer from one trophic level to another is affected by the differences in consumption efficiency and efficiency of energy conversion among different feeding groups. One measure that is used to describe the transfer of energy between trophic levels is called trophic efficiency. It is the ratio of productivity in a given trophic level to the trophic level it feeds on. As a consequence of decreasing energy transfer through the food web, there is a resulting decrease in the biomass of the organisms on each successive trophic level. A pyramid can be constructed if the biomass or energy contained on each trophic level is summed. This indicates that due to the energy or material lost at each successive level, the total mass supported at each level is constrained by the rate at which the energy is being stored in the lower level. Therefore, the biomass of producers must be greater than that of the herbivores, and the biomass of herbivores must be greater than that of the carnivores. The narrowing pyramid, however, is only true for most ecosystems. It becomes inverted in ecosystems such as lakes and open seas. These ecosystems have primary production which is concentrated in phytoplankton, which have short life cycle and rapid reproduction, and are heavily grazed by herbivorous plankton which are larger and have longer lifespans. This results in the biomass of the zooplankton herbivores being larger than that biomass